I never thought this day would come. The day I finally proved myself, but it was not for anyone else, it was for him. Sarah Mitchell stepped into the briefing room, her nerves hidden behind a calm, collected exterior. As a Navy officer with years of service, she had earned her place at the table. Yet today, the weight of a single person's gaze felt heavier than all the missions she had completed. Her father, Commander John Mitchell, stood at the front of the room, his eyes cold and judgmental. As the meeting commenced, Sarah couldn't help but notice the subtle shake of his head, the disapproving glance he cast in her direction. She had always struggled to win his respect, but this time it felt different. The room was filled with seasoned officers, each one with their own story, their own achievements, but it was the one man in the room whose opinion mattered the most to her that left her feeling like she didn't belong. For years, Sarah had fought tooth and nail to earn her spot in the Navy, and still, her father doubted her. He had always believed that women didn't belong in such a demanding, dangerous environment. He had spent his career with a traditional, almost outdated view of what a Navy officer should look like: hard, relentless, and masculine. Sarah had never fit that mold, and for a long time she wondered if she ever would. But this wasn't just about fitting in. It was about proving to herself, and to her father, that she had earned her place here. As the briefing progressed, her father's icy demeanor didn't waver. He watched her with a mixture of skepticism and resignation, as if he had already decided that she wasn't cut out for this life. It stung, but Sarah swallowed the pain. She would not let him see her falter. She could feel the eyes of the other officers on her, some curious, some supportive, but most indifferent. They knew her reputation, Shadow 9, the call sign she had earned in the field. It had been given to her for her ability to operate in the most dangerous conditions, to make quick, calculated decisions that saved lives. But to her father, it didn't mean a thing. To him it was just a label, something he could not fully comprehend. As the briefing came to a close, Sarah felt a deep sense of frustration. She had spent her entire career trying to prove herself, trying to earn respect, but here she was again, standing in the shadow of a man who refused to see her for who she truly was. But that would change today. She stood tall, pushing past the sting of her father's disapproval. It was her turn to speak. The commanding officer called her name, and Sarah took a deep breath, stepping forward to introduce herself. Sarah Mitchell. Call sign Shadow 9. The words came out smoothly, and for the first time that day, she saw something change in her father's eyes. It was a flicker of recognition, of realization. The room fell silent for a moment, and all eyes turned to John Mitchell. He had been so sure of his assumptions, so certain that his daughter did not belong here. But when he heard that call sign, something inside him shifted. Shadow 9 was not just a name. It was a legacy. A mark of respect earned in the toughest of circumstances. It was a name that commanded attention. It was Sarah's name. For the first time, Sarah saw her father's pride, not in the words he said, but in the way his gaze softened just for a moment. It was all she needed. It was enough. After the briefing, Sarah's father found her in the hallway. There was no need for words. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement that he had been wrong. Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with a sense of achievement, not for herself, but for the man who had finally seen her for who she was. She had earned his respect, but more importantly, she had earned her own. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time, Sarah felt like she truly belonged in the Navy. Her father had finally recognized it, and so had she. The days after the briefing were a blur for Sarah. She had finally proved herself, but now, a sense of quiet tension filled her life. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between her and her father. The respect she had earned, the recognition from her father, it felt good, but there was a part of her that couldn't forget the years of doubt, the years of feeling like she was always striving to be something she wasn't. She walked through the halls of the Navy base. The weight of the moment hung in the air like a cloud, but there was something different now. She felt lighter, like she had unlocked a door to a place she had always belonged. That evening, Sarah went to her father's office. She had never done this before, at least not without the pressure of some sort of conflict hanging over them. But today was different. She knocked on the door, and when her father called out, she stepped inside. John Mitchell was sitting at his desk, his back to the door, looking over some files. When he turned around and saw her standing there, he didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her with those piercing eyes that had always judged, always weighed. But now there was a softness in his gaze, something Sarah had longed for but never expected to see. "You did good today, Sarah," he said, his voice steady but lacking its usual stern edge. She stood still, unsure of what to say. All those years of waiting for this moment, and now, here it was. She didn't know how to respond. "You proved yourself," he continued. "More than I ever gave you credit for." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. This wasn't just about today. This was about every day she had worked, every day she had fought to be seen. She had spent years hearing his voice in her head, telling her she wasn't enough, telling her she couldn't cut it. But today everything had changed. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling foreign on her tongue but necessary. Her father nodded, his hand resting on the desk as he looked at her. "You've always had the drive," he said. "But I had to see it for myself. You didn't just get there by chance. You worked for it." Sarah swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. She wasn't just his daughter anymore. She was someone who had earned her place, and he finally saw that. For the first time it felt like her hard work wasn't something to prove, it was something to be proud of. There was a long pause, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The silence was different now. Not heavy with tension but filled with a quiet understanding. "I always wondered if you'd ever believe in me," Sarah finally said. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. Her father leaned back in his chair, his gaze never leaving her. "I believe in you now," he said simply, and the truth in his words left no room for doubt. It wasn't perfect, this reconciliation. It wasn't a grand gesture or an overwhelming show of emotion. But it was real, and for Sarah that was enough. She felt like she was standing on solid ground, the uncertainty of the past finally starting to fade. "You've got a long road ahead of you," her father said, his tone now more familiar. "But I think you're ready for it." Sarah smiled, a small knowing smile. She had been ready for this for a long time. She had been ready for the moment when she would no longer be fighting for recognition, but for the chance to move forward. And with her father's words, she knew she had finally arrived. As she left his office that night, the weight on her shoulders seemed lighter. There was still much to do, many challenges ahead, but for the first time Sarah felt like she belonged in the Navy, not just because of her rank or her call sign, but because she had earned it, and because her father had finally seen it. The path ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was hers to walk now. And as she walked through the halls of the base, she felt a sense of pride, not just in the job she had done, but in the relationship she had begun to rebuild with the man who had once doubted her. The days after their conversation in his office were quieter than Sarah had anticipated. It was as though the world around her had slowed down, and yet in her mind everything was racing. Sarah had always prided herself on being strong, on keeping her emotions in check, but now something inside her had changed. She felt the weight of her father's approval settle in her chest, like a heavy cloak she could finally wear with pride. But despite the subtle shift in their relationship, there was still a part of her that longed for more. As the weeks passed, Sarah continued her duties, her confidence growing with each successful mission. She had earned the respect of her peers, her officers, and even her father, but the doubt that had followed her for so long still lingered in the back of her mind. Was she really ready for the next step? Could she truly make a difference? Or was she still just a girl trying to prove herself in a world designed for men? One afternoon, Sarah was called into the commanding officer's office. She had no idea what to expect, but her heart raced with the possibility of another opportunity. She knocked and entered, finding herself standing before her superior, Captain Davis. He was reviewing some paperwork, but when he looked up, his eyes locked onto hers. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he began, his voice steady, "we have a new assignment, a high-priority mission. I need someone who can think on their feet, someone who doesn't hesitate." Sarah nodded, her mind already processing the details. She had trained for moments like this. "What's the mission, sir?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with determination. Captain Davis studied her for a moment before continuing. "We're deploying you on a covert operation. You'll be working alongside a specialized unit, gathering intel and making strategic decisions in real time. This is high risk, but I believe you're ready." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment she had trained for. But even as she felt the surge of excitement, she couldn't help but think of her father's doubts, of the years spent proving herself to him. "I won't let you down, sir," she said firmly, the words coming naturally now. She had no doubt about her ability, no hesitation in her resolve. Captain Davis gave her a slight nod, then handed her a set of files. "You'll leave tomorrow. Get yourself ready. This is your chance, Lieutenant." As Sarah walked out of the office, her heart pounded with anticipation. This mission was not just another assignment. It was her proving ground. She wasn't just doing this for the Navy. She was doing it for herself. She was no longer the girl her father had doubted. She was Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, and she was about to prove her place once and for all. That night, as she prepared for the mission, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the long hours spent training, the battles fought in silence, and the doubts that had plagued her mind for so long. But now all of that seemed distant. She had finally reached the point where she could stand tall, without needing to prove anything to anyone. She was no longer chasing approval. She was chasing her own potential. As Sarah finished packing her gear and checked her equipment, she glanced at the photo of her father that sat on her desk. It had always been there, a reminder of the man who had shaped her, for better or for worse. But now as she looked at it, she felt a sense of peace. Her father had seen her for who she truly was, and while there was still much to prove, the biggest hurdle had been cleared. Sarah was ready. The next day, as she boarded the helicopter that would take her to her mission site, she felt a calmness wash over her. The tension she had carried for so long was gone. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had earned her place, and nothing was going to take that from her. As the helicopter lifted off and soared into the sky, Sarah looked out at the horizon, the wind whipping through her hair. She was not just a daughter trying to live up to expectations. She was a Navy officer on a mission, her mission. And for the first time in her life, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The mission had begun, and Sarah Mitchell felt an overwhelming sense of focus as she entered the operation zone. The helicopter ride had been smooth, but her mind was already working ahead, analyzing every possibility. She had prepared for this moment for years, and now that she was here, it was time to execute everything she had learned. Her team was a mix of seasoned professionals, each one with their own strengths, but Sarah knew that her ability to think on her feet was her greatest asset. As the team gathered their gear, Sarah reviewed the operation plan once more. The objective was clear: infiltrate the enemy's territory, gather critical intelligence, and get out without being detected. It was dangerous, but this was exactly what she had trained for. Sarah adjusted her uniform, feeling the weight of the mission settle on her shoulders. There was no room for error. The air was thick with anticipation as the team set out, moving through the dense jungle under the cover of darkness. Sarah's instincts kicked in, and she led the way, her senses heightened. Every rustle of the leaves, every distant sound could be the enemy. But there was something different about this mission. For the first time, Sarah felt completely in control. She was no longer trying to prove anything. She was simply doing her job and doing it well. As they reached the target area, Sarah signaled for the team to halt. She crouched down, surveying the compound ahead. Her mind raced, calculating the best approach. It wasn't just about the mission, it was about trust. She had earned the trust of her team, and that was something she had longed for. There had been a time when she was the outsider, the one who had to fight for every ounce of respect. But now she was here, leading her team with confidence. As the team infiltrated the compound, Sarah's focus never wavered. They moved with precision, each step deliberate and calculated. The enemy had no idea they were there. The intel they needed was locked in a secure room, but getting to it wouldn't be easy. Sarah signaled for the team to breach the door. As the door opened, Sarah's heart raced. She knew they were close, but this was the most dangerous part of the mission. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with rows of computer terminals and sensitive files. Sarah's eyes scanned the room, but there was no time to waste. She moved quickly, directing her team to secure the perimeter. They worked in sync, each movement smooth and efficient. As Sarah approached the computer terminal, her fingers danced over the keys, bypassing the security measures with ease. She had trained for this moment, and now it was paying off. The files were hers to collect. The mission was almost complete. But as Sarah reached for the last file, a sudden noise from behind caught her attention. Her senses flared, and she spun around just in time to see two guards entering the room. Instinct took over, and before she could process what was happening, Sarah had already neutralized the threat, her training kicking in without hesitation. Her team had moved quickly, securing the room and ensuring there were no more surprises. "All clear," one of the officers reported, his voice calm. Sarah nodded, her heart still racing, but her mind was already moving forward. They had the intel. It was time to leave. As they made their way back to the extraction point, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment. The mission had been a success, and she had led her team through it with ease. The pride she had felt when her father had acknowledged her was nothing compared to this. This was real. This was what she had always wanted. As the helicopter soared back into the sky, Sarah looked out over the landscape below, the weight of the mission finally lifting. She had proven herself in every way. Not to her father, not to anyone else, but to herself. She had done it. She was no longer the girl fighting for respect. She was Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, and she had earned her place in the Navy. The mission was over, and Sarah Mitchell was finally back at base. The adrenaline that had fueled her during the operation was beginning to wear off, but the satisfaction of success lingered. She had led her team through a high-stakes mission, and they had completed it without a single hitch. The intel they gathered was crucial, and their clean extraction proved Sarah's leadership and decision-making. Still, despite the success, a small part of her felt restless. It was hard to shake off the feeling of waiting for the next test, the next challenge. For so long, she had been in a constant state of proving herself, and now she had done it. She had finally earned the recognition she had longed for. But the question remained, was it enough? The evening after the mission, Sarah walked into her father's office once again. This time, she wasn't carrying the weight of uncertainty. She was walking in as the confident officer she had always known herself to be, even if her father had taken years to see it. When John Mitchell looked up from his desk, he didn't say anything at first. He just watched her with those knowing eyes, the eyes that had seen everything, that had judged everything. There was no need for words between them. She had proven herself, and the silence spoke volumes. "You did well," her father said after a pause. His voice was steady, but there was something different in his tone. It wasn't just approval, it was respect. It was the respect that had been missing for so long, the respect that Sarah had spent years trying to earn. "Thank you," she replied, her voice calm, but there was a tremor of emotion she didn't try to hide. Her father had finally seen her. And in that moment, Sarah realized she didn't need anyone else's approval. She had already earned her place. "You've done something I never thought possible," her father continued, his gaze softening. "I was wrong about you. You've earned your right to be here, and you've done it on your terms." Sarah felt a sense of pride swell in her chest. Her father's words meant more to her than he would ever know. She had always been the one trying to prove she was capable, but now the man who had once doubted her was standing before her, acknowledging her success. For the first time she felt truly at peace with who she was. "I never needed you to believe in me," Sarah said quietly. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't a statement of defiance. It was the truth. She had spent so long trying to win his respect that she had forgotten to respect herself. Now she no longer needed validation from anyone. She had proven to herself that she belonged here. "But it means everything that you finally see me," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father didn't respond right away. He simply nodded, his expression hard to read. But Sarah didn't need anything more. The words were enough. She had worked hard to get to this point, and now that she was here, she knew her journey wasn't over. The Navy was just the beginning. As she left her father's office that night, a sense of peace settled over her. The weight she had carried for so long had finally been lifted. She wasn't just a daughter proving herself to her father. She was Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, a Navy officer with a future ahead of her. She had earned her place in the Navy, and she was ready for whatever came next. Sarah Mitchell woke up to the sound of rain tapping against her window. The soft, rhythmic patter had always been soothing to her. But this morning, it felt like a reminder that her journey was far from over. It had been a few months since the mission, since the conversation with her father, and yet the feeling of accomplishment hadn't faded. She had proven herself in the field, earned her father's respect, but there was a nagging thought in the back of her mind. What next? For years she had chased one goal after another, and now that she had reached a place where she felt at peace, a new question lingered. What was the next challenge? Sarah sat up in bed, rubbing her eyes, trying to shake the sense of restlessness that had begun to creep in. She had earned her place, but the weight of responsibility was heavier than ever. The Navy had become her life, and now she had to decide where to go from here. The rain was still falling outside, but Sarah knew she couldn't just sit back and relax. She had been raised to push forward, to never stop striving for more. She got dressed quickly, throwing on her uniform with practiced ease, and left her quarters. The base was quiet at this early hour, with only a few officers and personnel starting their shifts. Sarah didn't need to think twice about her next move. She headed straight for the training facility. As she entered, the familiar hum of activity greeted her. The trainers were already there, preparing for the day's drills, and the recruits were lining up, ready to begin their morning exercises. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had been here before, but this time it felt different. She wasn't just a participant anymore. She was a leader. She had come a long way since the days when she had to fight for every bit of respect. Now she was here, not just to prove her worth, but to help others find their own. As she walked to the front of the room, the recruits turned to look at her, their eyes full of curiosity and respect. She could see it in their faces. They were just like she had been. Eager, hungry for knowledge, and unsure if they truly belonged. Sarah took a deep breath and addressed them. I know what it feels like to be here, standing in front of you all wondering if I can do this. She began, her voice steady and firm. But I'm here to tell you, you are capable of so much more than you think. Don't let anyone, not even yourself, tell you otherwise. She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. She could see some of the recruits nodding, others unsure. It didn't matter. Sarah had been where they were, and now she was here to guide them. This isn't just about learning skills, she continued. It's about believing in yourself, even when the odds seem impossible. I didn't get here because I was the best at everything. I got here because I didn't quit, and neither should you. The room fell silent, but it wasn't the kind of silence that made Sarah uneasy. It was a quiet that spoke of understanding, of respect. She had their attention, and that was what mattered. Over the next few hours, Sarah led the drills, pushing the recruits harder than they had been pushed before. She wasn't being tough for the sake of it. She was preparing them for the real world, where there would be no room for doubt or hesitation. By the end of the day, the recruits were exhausted but proud. Sarah could see the difference in them. They had grown stronger not just physically but mentally. She had done her job, and now they were ready for whatever came next. As she walked back to her quarters later that evening, Sarah felt a sense of fulfillment that she hadn't expected. She had been searching for something, and now she had found it. The next challenge wasn't about earning respect or proving herself. It was about giving back, about helping others reach the same place she had. The journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. Sarah knew this was her new mission. She wasn't just a Navy officer anymore. She was a mentor, a guide, and that was something she was ready for. She had earned her place not just in the Navy, but in the hearts of those she had helped along the way. Sarah Mitchell sat in her quarters staring out the window, the sounds of the base filtering through the walls. It had been months since the mission, since she had truly proven herself. She had moved past the uncertainty, past the self-doubt, and had earned the respect of her peers and superiors. But even now there was an emptiness she couldn't ignore. She had come so far, yet something was missing. The Navy had been her life, her purpose, for so long that she couldn't imagine anything else. But now, as she reflected on her journey, she wondered if it was time for a new chapter. It wasn't just about the mission anymore, or proving herself to others. It was about what came next. It was time for something more. As she sat in silence, Sarah's thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. She quickly stood up and walked over to open it, finding Captain Davis standing there. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he began. His usual stern expression softened just slightly. "There's something I need to discuss with you." Sarah raised an eyebrow, curious but ready for whatever it was. Of course, sir. What's on your mind? Captain Davis stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He didn't waste any time. We've been tracking a new operation. One that's going to require someone with your experience. It's going to be big, and it's going to be challenging. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had known something like this would come, but the weight of it hit her in that moment. A new mission. A chance to prove herself once again. What's the objective? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. We're being asked to help with a high-level operation in a region we've been monitoring for months. It's risky, but we believe you're the right person for the job. You've earned your place, Sarah. Captain Davis's words hit her harder than she expected. He didn't just believe in her. He trusted her. And for Sarah, that trust was everything. When do I leave? She asked, her mind already racing through the logistics of the operation. Tomorrow, he replied. We'll brief you in the morning. Pack light. This is going to move fast. The weight of the mission was palpable now, but Sarah didn't hesitate. She had been waiting for this moment, for the next challenge. And this was it. She knew it would be difficult, but she also knew that she was ready. She had earned this opportunity, just as she had earned every step of her journey up until this point. The next day, Sarah stood at the briefing room, surrounded by her team, preparing for the operation ahead. The room was filled with anticipation, but there was also a quiet confidence in the air. This wasn't the first time she had faced a high-stakes mission, but this time it felt different. It wasn't just about doing the job, it was about leading. She had earned the right to lead this mission. As the briefing started, Sarah's mind focused on the details. She knew this mission would test everything she had learned, but it was exactly what she had been waiting for. The challenge was no longer about proving her worth. It was about taking on the responsibility that came with the trust others had placed in her. The operation was complex, with numerous moving parts, but Sarah felt ready. She had learned to navigate the chaos, to lead her team through uncertainty, and now she would apply everything she had gained to bring this mission to success. As the team made its final preparations, Sarah took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself for the journey ahead. She wasn't just Sarah Mitchell, the officer trying to earn her place. She was Sarah Mitchell, the leader, and she knew she was ready for what lay ahead. This wasn't just another mission, it was her mission. And this time there was no turning back. The operation had been a success. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the base, looking out across the vast expanse. The helicopter had just landed, and the team had disembarked, their mission completed, their objective achieved. Yet, as Sarah looked at the horizon, she felt a strange sense of detachment. The mission was over, but the feeling of accomplishment wasn't as fulfilling as she had imagined. For so long she had sought recognition, approval, and success. She had worked tirelessly to prove herself to others, but now with the mission behind her, she realized something crucial. It was no longer about earning respect from others, it was about how she viewed herself. Over the past few months she had done everything she set out to do. She had earned the trust of her team, the respect of her superiors, and even her father's acknowledgement. She had fought for her place in the Navy, and now she was a leader in her own right. But standing there, in the quiet aftermath of the operation, Sarah felt a shift. She realized that her journey wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about understanding her own value. As the team gathered for debriefing, Sarah walked in, her posture strong, her mind sharp. She had led the operation, made decisions under pressure, and helped secure valuable intelligence. But what struck her the most was how much she had grown throughout the process. She had started this journey seeking validation, but now she had something far more meaningful: self-assurance. The debriefing was routine and the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. Captain Davis praised her leadership, and her team members expressed their gratitude for her guidance. But it wasn't the praise that mattered to Sarah. It was the quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had done her best, that she had led with integrity and strength. After the debriefing, Sarah found herself standing outside the command building, alone for the first time in what felt like weeks. She took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. The weight of everything she had accomplished seemed to lift with each passing moment. She had come so far, and now for the first time she felt at peace with herself. It wasn't about the Navy, the recognition, or the approval. It was about the quiet confidence she now held within herself. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she glanced at the screen. It was a message from her father. She hadn't expected to hear from him so soon, especially not after everything that had happened. With a deep breath, she opened the message. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. More than you know." The words were simple, but the impact was profound. Her father's pride, his approval, meant something different now. It wasn't about validation, it was about understanding. He understood her, not just as his daughter, but as the person she had become. As Sarah stood there, reading the message, she realized something. She no longer needed to prove herself to anyone. She had already done that. What mattered now was what she would do next. The future was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah was ready to embrace it. She wasn't just a Navy officer. She was a leader, a woman who had earned her place, not just in the Navy but in the world. With that thought, Sarah smiled. She was ready for whatever came next. She had earned this moment, and it was hers to enjoy. The days after the operation passed in a blur for Sarah Mitchell. The mission had been a defining moment, but it was not the end of her journey. It was just another chapter. The satisfaction she had felt after the successful completion of the mission lingered, but it was a quiet satisfaction, one that spoke of a deep understanding of her own worth. The recognition from her father, the pride in his words, had brought a sense of closure, but Sarah knew that her real challenge was ahead of her. The next step was not about seeking approval or validation. It was about embracing her role as a leader. As Sarah settled back into her routine at the base, she noticed the subtle shift in how she interacted with her colleagues and subordinates. There was no longer a need to prove herself. The respect she had earned was genuine, not just given out of obligation. She had earned it through hard work, dedication, and resilience. But with that recognition came new responsibilities. She found herself taking on more leadership roles, guiding her team through complex operations, and making decisions that affected not just her future, but the future of those around her. The weight of leadership was heavier than she had anticipated, but it was also something she embraced with newfound confidence. As the months passed, Sarah continued to excel in her role. She led missions, made critical decisions, and inspired her team to achieve excellence. Yet, as much as she thrived in her professional life, there was an undercurrent of restlessness. She had accomplished so much, but there was a yearning within her for something more. It wasn't about climbing the ranks or proving herself further. It was about finding deeper meaning in her work and her life. One evening, as Sarah sat in her office, reviewing mission reports, she received another message from her father. The words were simple, but they carried weight. "You've come a long way, Sarah. You've made me proud, and I know you'll go even further." Sarah put down the phone, letting the words sink in. Her father's pride had always been something she had sought, but now it wasn't just about his acknowledgement. It was about what she had learned along the way. The lessons had come not just from her father, but from the journey she had taken, the struggles she had overcome, and the woman she had become. She had learned that her worth wasn't defined by anyone's expectations. It was defined by the work she put in, the integrity she upheld, and the leader she had become. The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. Sarah had reached the point where she no longer had to prove anything to anyone. She had proven it to herself. One day, during a routine debriefing with her team, Sarah took a moment to reflect on her path. As she looked at the faces of the men and women in the room, she realized that they were looking at her not just as a superior officer, but as someone who had earned their respect, someone they trusted. The weight of that trust was humbling, but it also filled her with pride. She had become the kind of leader who inspired others, not through force or authority, but through her actions, her commitment, and her ability to listen and lead with empathy. Later that evening, as Sarah stood on the balcony of her quarters, overlooking the base, she allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She had come so far from the uncertain woman who first stepped into the Navy, unsure of where she belonged. Now she stood tall, secure in who she was and what she had accomplished. But even as she reflected on her journey, Sarah knew that her story was far from finished. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape. And for the first time in a long time, she felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She wasn't just a Navy officer. She was a woman who had earned her place, and she was ready to continue building her legacy, one step at a time.